Hi and welcome to PolyOriginals with Fiona Abel-Smith. So today I thought we'd do a fun and easy little cane, which is this one. It gives you a really nice pattern, and I've called this one the triple blend cane because we're going to do 3 different Skinner blends and put them together to create this nice pattern. I wanted to do a project where I could cover something to give quite a nice big veneer, so I could have done a notebook, could have covered around a glass jar, made a little vase or a plate or something, but just to do something different, I've got one of these, which is actually a phone or a tablet holder, and I've just covered that, and I'll take you on to where I get that from later. And it works by having the slot, and then your phone or tablet simply sits in it at an angle and is supported, so you can use it and view your screen. I came up with this cane idea after somebody asked me how I choose what to do with my Skinner blends and how I decide whether to do one of the folded or concertina types or whether to do the rolled Skinner blends. So we've got a combination of each. We've got a folded one and then 2 rolled ones, and I've just come up with 3 different ways to manipulate the canes to give you a different look. And as always with what I do with my projects, you don't have to follow slavishly what I'm doing. If you decide to put your combinations together in a different way, that's fine. If when we cut it you decide to put it together in a different way, you will get a different pattern. So just have fun and experiment. This is a nice easy one, as I say, suitable for beginners upwards, and hopefully you'll get some really good results. So let's start with the equipment you need, and then we can get on with today's project. So for today's project, there's not too much in the way we need of equipment. You'll need a polymer clay blade, I often refer to these as tissue blades, a craft knife, a small blunt-ended knitting or cable needle. This is just to sort of create joins between seams and also a nice round groove, which we're going to create at one point of the cane. A roller comes in handy, again just to roll over and also to create a groove. You can use that roller to roll with, but it's also quite handy if you have a brayer roller. Certain parts that we're doing, it's quite handy to have one of those. If you have some liquid polymer clay, I've just decanted some into a pot here. If you don't have any, then PVA glue will work just as well. Ruler comes in handy just to score along and to cut the clay in nice straight lines, and a metal ruler is good for doing that. When we're creating our veneer, a couple of sheets big enough to fit the piece of clay you're doing is really good, and this is waxed paper, but greaseproof paper, baking parchment, anything like that works just as well. I've got a couple of sheets here. As a smoothing tool, the stainless steel soap works really well to do nice small round movements, but if you don't have one of those, then simply use the roller instead and do small round movements with the roller. When we're creating our cane, a measuring sheet is good to have, and this one is freely available from www.printablepaper.net. This is the 4 squares to an inch one, and I've simply laminated mine to make it reusable lots of times. And because I'm covering this phone stand today, this is one I bought from IKEA. I'm sure they're available from loads of other places, but this one I've tested in the oven and it's fine. It doesn't crack or move in any point at all, and I'll come on to that a little bit later when we're going through the video. But I'm going to cover one of those, and because when I'm covering it, one part of what I'm covering is always going to be flat down on the tile, no matter which side I do first, I've got a sheet of card, so I will simply put the card on the tile so that where the clay touches the tile, it doesn't go shiny. And on that, of course, I'm going to have a tile that I'm going to work on and also bake in using the oven. And other equipment, I will use wet wipes or some form of wet tissues, ordinary tissues just to keep my hands and equipment clean, and of course a pasta machine dedicated to polymer clay use. And when I bake, I'll use some aluminium foil, and I literally tent the whole tile with the foil well away from the piece we're covering, just to protect it slightly should the oven spike during baking. So that's it, that's all the equipment we need for today's session. So let's move on to the clay. So to make the cane, I'm going to be using Fimo Soft, and these are the colours that I'm going to be using. I've got apple green, emerald green, olive green, white, and then black. And then to cover the phone stand, I'm going to use some more clay, and I'm going to use black for this one because it's going to link in with the colour I've got as the background, although I could have chosen any one of those 3 instead, or even white. So just choose what you want to do, but for what I'm doing in the project, I'm going to use black. So for the amounts of clay, we've actually got 1/3 of an ounce or 9 grams of all of these, and 2/3 of an ounce or 18 grams of this one, and this one is 1 ounce or 28 grams, so a lot more of the colour we need for the back. So the first thing to do is to condition all of the clay I'm going to put the black to one side. Condition all of your colours separately, the whites first and then moving up through the colours, so that if you've got a darker colour you do the lighter one first, and any sticks in the machine, it's not going to make a difference to your light colours. And I'm going to do all of them in these separate mounts, because we're going to do Skinner blends with these two and these two. If you're unsure about conditioning clay at all, I do have a video tutorial showing you a few tips and hints and techniques for doing that, and I'll put a link to that in the video description below this video. So I'm going to put all of these through on setting number 3 on my pasta machine, and on my pasta machine 0 is thick, 9 is thin, so 3 is a medium setting. And I'll bring you back when I've got those done, and at the same time, once I've got all those done, I will also condition this clay and again put this through on setting 3, although I might change that when we get to those bits. So that's the preparation. Let's move on to actually making the cane. All my clay has been nicely conditioned, and I've put it together in the groups that I'm going to do. So I'm going to do a Skinner blend for those two, and these two. Just a straightforward 2-colour blend. If you're unsure about Skinner blends, I have a video tutorial which gives you some hints and tips and techniques on how to get a good Skinner blend, and I'll put links to that in the video description below. But what we're doing for now, all I'm going to do is very roughly cut through diagonal line, double up the colours and put them together, pushing the diagonal line down. That's that one. That's that one. And then there's that one. Now in the design I'm doing today, I have done a specific thing. I've got a light colour, a medium colour and a darker colour, and they're all obviously greens, and I've done this with blues and purples and reds, and I'll show you that at the end with your other colour options. Obviously you can do completely different colours, but do make sure you've got one light, one medium and one dark. And again, when I've done this, I've always done the light in a particular way, one part, one element, one Skinner blend, and the same with the other two. But feel free to experiment. If you want one part of the design to stand out more than the other, then perhaps put your brighter colour in that. That'll make more sense as we go through. So I'm going to do these one at a time, and I'm going to start with our lightest one. So start with the light green. And all I'm going to do now, because I've got the 2 layers there but they're not really pressed together, I'm just going to fold them up. And then when I do my Skinner blend, I will put them fold first through, constantly catch, fold up, catch, fold up, catch, fold up, until after about 12 times you've got a nice blend from one end through to the other. So I will get that done, and I'm going to put this through on setting number 2, so one thickness thicker than I'm currently using, because of course we've got 4 layers of clay here now, and I'll bring you back when I've got this done into a nice blend. So when you've got a nice blend done, all I'm going to do is I'm going to fold that in half, and I'm going to put it through the dark end first, same setting as I've put through, so the folds at the side, to get myself a longer strip of clay. And now I'm going to put it back through the pasta machine on my thinnest usable setting, dark end first again, to give myself quite a nice long thin strip. If you know your machine is good, then you can do the same. If, however, your machine is one that sort of tends to chew up the clay slightly, then go down one setting at a time until you get to your thinnest usable setting. So mine's going to be setting number 9, so I'll put that straight back through and get myself a nice long thin strip. Once you have your long thin strip, and I'm really not bothered about slight marks in it like this, I'll let them go. If it's a big lump of dark clay, then I might cut it out, but small bits like that aren't going to show. So I'm not going to worry either about the end not being particularly neat, but I'm simply going to concertina this backwards and forwards, and that's about 3/4 of an inch, 2 centimetres wide. And as I go, try to make sure I've got no air trapped, and I'm trying to keep it relatively neat and square, this one. Once you've got it down, like mine, you might find that it's gone all skew-if, but that's fine, because all we're going to do is we're going to flatten down the ends. We want to spend a bit of time making this into a nice, fairly even rectangle or oblong, boxy type shape. Probably want to be about 1.5 inches, so about 3.5 centimetres high, and sort of like an oblong shape. And say, if you can, try and make sure you've roughly got the same shape top and bottom. That is our first one done. Now I'm going to move on to the emerald. I'm going to do exactly the same up until we've got that nice long thin strip on our thinnest usable setting. So I'll get this one done to that stage and bring you back when I've done that. So there we go, that's the emerald green, and this time I'm going to roll up. So again, I'm not worried about it being uneven on this edge. If you want to, you can chop it off, but for what we're doing, it's not going to really notice in the final piece. And I'm just rolling it up, making sure it's nice and tight as you go, so there's no trapped air. Just flatten off the ends to make sure it's as neatish as you can do, and that's your second piece done. Put that to one side, and then we're going to do exactly the same with this one. Fold it in half, do the skinny blend, get through to exactly the same stage to it's nice, long and thin, and I'll bring you back when I've got this one done to that stage. There we go, that's our last one done, and this one we're actually going to roll from the dark end upwards. And again, I'm not worried about the ends not being overly neat, but I'm going to try and make sure I get no air bubbles and keep this as a nice tight roll. Okay, so those are our 3 skinny blends done. And now for the fun part where we start manipulating and adding in the black. Now this is the small amount of black, the 2/3 of an ounce, and although I conditioned it on setting number 3 on my pasta machine, I have now put it through on the thinner setting, so setting number 5, which will give us a good thickness for what we're planning to do when we start experimenting and changing our bits. So I'm going to start with the light one, the green one, and what we're going to do is we are going to chop down through this from one corner to the opposite corner, and as I'm doing it, I'm going to try and keep it nice and neat going down both of those corners. And the way to do this is effectively to seesaw. So have a look over, push the knife down one side, have a look back, push it down this side, and keep going to make sure you've got a nice even cut all the way down through the length of your cane. We're then going to take our knitting needle or our cable needle, and I'm just going to push in and create a groove. So it's going about halfway the depth of the needle on that side, and the same halfway, and give it a little roll to release it. I'm going to pull off a little bit of the black clay, and I'm going to roll this up into a sausage, again making sure there's no air trapped inside, and I don't want very thick, I want it about the thickness of this needle. When you've got a piece the right thickness, just drop it in. When you've put that piece in, cut a piece of the black, the right height for the cane you're working on, cut off one end, nice and neat, and then going towards the thinner end of your piece, just add the black in underneath the round you've just added and chop it off. You can then put yours back together, but you want to put it back together in such a way that you're not putting it back the way it was, you're turning it upside down. So this way, when you put it back together and fit it both one end and the other, what you've actually got is the light at one end, the dark at the other, dark at one end, light at the other, and you've got a nice sort of kite shape. The other thing I will do at this stage, because there's possibility of having some air trapped in there, from the middle I will push out slightly and pull so that hopefully there's no air trapped where that black dot is down the middle. So that's your first piece done, so that goes to one side. Let's move on to the next one. Now we want this piece to become longer, not quite twice the length of this because we're going to manipulate it, but almost. So keeping that one to hand, I'm just going to pull down and push in the edges of this very slightly to stop a distortion. So not a lot, just a little bit, because now when I roll it, we should end up with less distortion on the end. As I say, I want it not quite, but almost going towards twice the length of that one. I'm then going to take this roller, which is a polymer clay roller, and pressing it in, create a groove right down the length. So I'm pressing quite hard. I want it to go sort of about halfway through, and then twist this to remove it. You can pull that bit up to curve it slightly more, and then chop this in half. Stand it up on the end so you can see what's happening, and you're going to sit one piece inside the groove for the other piece. What that then leaves is a gap here, that's a triangle, and a gap here, that's a semicircle, and we're going to fill those in with the bits of the black to create what's going to end up with more of a triangular shape. So I'm going to leave that piece to one side because that was the right size for what we were working on, and I'm just going to get another piece of the black, and again just roll it up, trying to make sure you've got no air trapped inside. And I'm going to roll it first into a piece to do the hemisphere. And I want it to sort of sit, so it sits inside but it doesn't go up to the edge. So if you can see the sort of the width of it there. Because what we're then going to do with your fingers, press it flat onto the tile and then press the top slightly flat. And doing that, you'll have created a little hemisphere. So I'm going to chop off at the bottom to give it flat at the bottom. So you can see there the shape we've created. And then I'm going to fit that in so it's flat at the bottom. Push it in, and then you just chop it off at the top. You can open it out slightly if it doesn't quite fit in the groove. And then this bit we're going to change. You can roll it up again into a ball, and this one I'm going to create a little triangle to fit in there. And to do the triangle, we're going to start by rolling ourselves a long sausage shape, and then again with the fingers pressed to create a little point, just press down and then rotate and press, and by doing that you create a triangle. Again, try and keep it fairly even. Chop off where it is nice and even, slot that in down the bottom, do the whole way up, chop off any excess. As before, you can push it to the side just to create a nice even fill. And then we have a very rough sort of triangular shape, but I'm going to force that into more of a triangular shape by simply putting one bit down flat and pressing my fingers to create more of a triangular shape. And if you notice, I leave a finger here, and I'll do the same when I'm going this way to make sure that these ends stay fairly flat. And what we're looking for is a piece that's roughly the same height as that one. So I'm going to press it down slightly because it's a little bit longer. And that is our second piece done. So our third piece, this one we're going to chop into quarters, nice even quarters if we can. So again, take your time, seesaw if you need to, backwards and forwards, going all the way down, turn over, and then put it into quarters. If you find you're going wrong, you can always push it back all together and then re-roll it and redo it. And what I'm going to do with these quarters is I'm going to sit them together but put them alternates. So for these two, the lights to the outside, and for these two, the lights to the outside that side. So we've got a nice sort of flat piece now. What we're going to do is going to take a bit more of the black clay, and we're going to create little triangles that are going to sit here and here. It'll make sense in a moment. Now these triangles need to be quite a lot smaller than these shapes. So just roll it around. You'll also notice that my hands are getting quite nice and black when I'm using this black, and that's because in Fimo the black is one of the colours that really transfers to your hands. If you're working in Primo, Sculpey, Cernit or Kato, you won't find the same problem, but it is a problem with the Fimo, which is why I need a fair few wet wipes and tissues to clean my hands as we go along. Right, once you've got a nice shape, as we did before, that sort of shape with your fingers, just create a little triangle, but this time you want enough to be twice the length of that. So do it on one side, turn over, do it on the third side if you want to make yourself a nice little triangular cane. As before, chop off to the bottom, and for this one I'm actually going to just mark the right height to cut two pieces off, because it's easier to do it that way on this one. Now these sit not to the outer edge, they're not to the white edge, but they sit towards the back. The reason being that having put it in place, you're then going to curl this outer light edge towards the dark shape. Same with this one, sitting not towards the outer white bit, but on the inside, and then this curls round. Just gives it a nice look in the finished cane. And that's it. So we need to make sure that's the right height, which it more or less is. You can always pull it slightly longer if it needs to be. And there are our 3 canes. Now they're going to sit together a bit like that, and we're going to make this more triangular in a minute. But what you can see there is you've got a nice triangular shape left in the middle, and we're going to fill that with the black. But we also want a bit of separation where all the other canes are going to touch each other. So I'm going to put a bit of black halfway down here, so that where this one touches, it's not going to touch exactly. I'm going to put black down the whole of this side, so that where it touches here, it's not going to join in. And then again, we're going to put black down this side, so that when this one curls round, it's not going to be touching the green. And the rest of this bit is going to be filled in with black. So we've already got the piece here that was the right size. So I'm going to add it to this side only of my cane there. Then I'm going to add it to this bit and chop off. I don't need to add this bit at the black because that's going to be sat next to the triangle in the middle. And I'm going to turn it so the black's on the outside there and this black's here. So this bit's got no black in it. So I'm going to fold that over and put that halfway down that side as well. So now I've got all those bits, I can put together all the rest of my black that I've got. And then that should make the right size triangle to fit and take up our gap in the middle. So as before, press it all together, make sure there's no air bubbles. Roll it into a large sausage and then start creating that triangular shape. And it just needs to be the same height as the canes we're already working with. As soon as you've got it the right height, it should hopefully just pop in, join up with those black bits you've already put on, and then we'll pop him on the end there. Now you'll notice that of course this isn't a point as yet, but that's fine, because what we're going to do is we are going to curl these bits round and press them in to make a point. Do it up one side and then turn it over and do it on the other side. And that is effectively our cane created, more or less triangular shape. So all we're going to do now is we're going to turn it on its side, and I will go and clean my hands because they are very, very messy, and we're going to simply press it down, pulling it longer whilst at the same time pushing it in to elongate and reduce our cane. So we're going to get the same pattern, but it's going to become much longer, and we're going to reduce this until it gets to about 4 inches or 10 centimetres in length, at which point we're going to cut it in two. So I will speed up this process, and so you can see me reducing the cane. When you've got it to roughly 4 inches in length, take your knife, take your blade and cut down through the middle. And this is the point at which you're going to put it together. Now obviously you can put it together that way, or you can put it together that way. And each way you put it together, you're going to get a slightly different pattern. So I've been putting mine together like this. So with my light colour at the top, my darkest colour at the bottom, and the medium colour at the side. And I just like the pattern that it gives you. It's a nice bright pattern. But obviously do whatever you want to do, and if you want to create your pattern in different ways, then put it together differently. You could of course always put one half of this together one way and put one half together another way, rather than just putting it in one big one. But for what I'm doing today, covering the phone stand, I need quite a lot of the cane, the single canes, which is why I'm doing it like this. I'm also then going to turn over, and I'm going to make sure that I'm matching up this end as well. Spend a bit of time, make sure that it all matches nicely in together. So we now have a diamond shaped cane, but I want to make this into a triangle. So I'm going to do so by putting this end flat on the tile and then gently pressing down on these two sides. By doing that and doing it that way, you actually create a little bit of a curl in these two sides as you're going down, which gives you a nice effect. So obviously I'm going to do that flat on my tile. So I'm going to, with one hand, hold on to these bits because these bits have a tendency to want to spring open, and very gently with these two fingers, slowly to start with, just work your way backwards and forwards until you get them pressed nice and flat. You'll notice that these bits start to stick out more. That's absolutely fine. We can adjust that in a minute. And that's all I'm doing, very slowly. And now I can do it from the side as well. We're just pushing it down until we get those flat. You can turn it over and with your fingers flatten out this bottom bit as well. And then because this bit here is longer, you can very gently pull all of these point bits till they become longer too. You can also turn it on its side, flatten it down, pull the sides down till it becomes nice and neat. And you therefore have more or less a right angled triangle, which is what we want because we want to make this into a square cane. So what I'm going to do now is I'm now going to reduce this down in this shape until again we get to about 4 inches or 10 centimetres in length. Okay, so when we've got it the right length, I'm again just going to chop it down into half. And I'm going to put those two halves together to make ourselves a square cane. And obviously it's slightly diamond shaped still, but I will sort that out later, and I'll also make sure that I match up those two ends as well. But before you do that, just to show you, if you didn't want to make a square cane, or we wanted to have half as a triangular cane and half as a square cane, if you kept one bit to one side and reduced it down to make an equilateral triangle, and you'd do that simply by pressing it in, turning around, pressing again, and eventually you'd end up with a nice even triangle where each side is the same size and length. If you did that and then put your pieces together in hexagons, you would get this pattern. So you might want to put a little bit to one side now in order to get these nice patterns and to create those shapes if you want to. However, for what we're doing today, I need the whole bit. So as I said, I'm going to put the whole thing together in a square cane. And now all I'm going to do is I'm going to go down and press in and concentrate on bringing that back into more of a square shape. Press down on the sides and on the ends again, and before long you can also just press in the corners there to make it more of a square. And before long you will end up with a nice square shape. So before we reduce it any further, we need to find out what size we want to reduce it to. So take your measuring sheet, take whatever it is you're planning on covering. Now just to talk a little bit about this, this is a wooden phone stand. As I said, I bought this from IKEA, but other places will sell them as well. And this is quite a nice solid piece of wood with a little bit of felt stuck in either side so it doesn't mark the phone. Now before I started covering this, I tested these to make sure they don't warp or crack in the oven. So I put it in on the tile, covered in foil as I would normally do, at the temperature that I would bake the clay on, to make sure that it didn't warp, so it didn't split, didn't in any way distort, and it was absolutely fine. But before you cover anything, I would thoroughly recommend doing that, because there's nothing worse than spending a lot of time doing all the wonderful pattern, putting it in the oven, and then it breaks or distorts or cracks or anything else. So that's one thing. We also need to decide whether or not the pattern's going on the top and that side, but you need to decide whether or not you want to cover the sides. Now I do decide to cover those. I think it looks nicer to have a matching colour clay to what you've got on the top rather than have it with the wood showing, and I will use that just for the plain black, and we'll come on to that in a minute. But before we do that, let's say you need to measure the size. Now according to the measuring sheet, this one is just over 3 inches across that way, and just over 5 inches, so nearly 5.5 inches going that way. So if I break that down into 3 across by 5 in the length, let me do that way so you can see that. So 3 across this way by 5 that way, then I would need 15 squares. And I have worked out that starting from here and going all the way around to here is the same length as the whole piece. So I know that, say, 5.5 by 3 and a little bit is fine. So if I make my square cane just over one of these big squares, so just over an inch, so probably 1.5 inches, all the way around on each side, then it should be 3 by 5 will cover the phone base completely. So that's what I'm going to aim to do. So I will start to reduce this down till I've got it the right size to create a veneer for this. Once I've got it to more or less the size I want, I'm going to take it up and I'm going to pinch nice tight corners down each side. And then emphasise the sides, the flatness of the sides, by rolling out. And then go back in and make sure that it's the right size. Okay, that is our cane ready to go. What I will do is I'll just neaten off one end so I can check the size. And I'll go down till I don't reach any distortion. I can see there that's pretty square and more or less the size I wanted. So that's brilliant. So I can put that to one side and let it rest just for a little while, because whilst I'm doing that, I'm going to cover the sides of this piece of wood. So here's the extra piece of black, which I'm going to use to do the bottom and the sides of the wooden phone base. And I've put this through on setting number 5 at the moment, but I want it a lot thinner than that, so I'm just going to take a bit and I'm going to put it through on setting number 7, which is quite a thin setting on my pasta machine. So I'm going to chop off a piece just longer, and then standing it on its end, get a couple of pieces that are actually wider than the bits I'm trying to cover. I can then take a little bit of the liquid clay. As I say, if you haven't got this, then PVA glue would do just as well, and just on one side to start with. So not enough to make it runny, but just enough to make it nice and tacky. And then you're going to just put your clay right over the top of the piece. If you've got a brayer roller, then this is the perfect time to use this, just to gently roll the clay flat. And you can also just roll slightly down the edges as well, just to make it go slightly around the edges. And if you haven't got that, then just do it with your finger, just slightly down the edges. And of course what we need to do now is to chop out the bits where the gaps are. You can generally see those quite easily. So I'm going to take my craft knife and just to do roughly to start with, take out the excess clay. And once you've done that, you can then generally see where it is you're going and follow the line of the wood, not the line of the felt, because the felt is going to press in against whatever it is machine you're putting in there. And you'll find as well that they do go at an angle. If you chop too much off, Just get your needle and gently push it back in. And when you've got your edges done, with the needle just roll very gently over it anyway, just to neaten it off. And spend a bit of time, go back in, neaten them off if you need to. Roll over the top as well, and then repeat with the second one. And then when both of those have been neatly cut out, you should, with your tissue blade, just be able to very gently cut straight along the edge. You'll find the corners or around the curves are slightly more difficult, so you might want to do it in a couple of attempts because the blade doesn't tend to move smoothly around them. And again, when you're done, give it a bit of a roll. As a final thing, with a wet tissue or a wet wipe, wet bit of cloth, I just go very gently over and just smooth down the edge. Just to make sure there's no rough edges, because I don't want to spend time sanding this piece or polishing it when it's finished. So I want it to have a nice finish right from the start. If you're happy that you can hold on to this quite easily and not touch this side at all to do the second side, do the second side now. If you think you're someone who's likely to get fingerprints or marks in it, then bake this first and then come back and put your other piece on. But I'm just going to put the second piece on because I'm going to make sure I hold it just here so I don't actually touch this side, and I'll bring you back when I've got this second piece done. Okay, so there's both sides done. So all I simply do is I put that on my tile, tent the whole thing in a piece of aluminium foil, and according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. Whilst that's baking, we can move on and start putting our tile together to create the veneer to go over the top. With the rest of the black clay, I've cut myself a very thin sheet, so I put this through on setting number 8, so a very nice thin sheet of my pasta machine, and I did it the right size, so just over 3 by just over 5 inches. And if your piece is actually ready and out of the oven, you can use that as a template to cut around and get the right size. And the reason I'm doing this is because I find it easier to cut the slices, put them on a backing sheet of thin bit of clay, easier to put them together and to match them all up. Much easier to do it on one long sheet, and then it'll fit nicely over. So putting that to one side for a second, we know, as we said, we need 15 of these squares. So all I'm going to do is very carefully chop down through. Now when you're doing this, I know that I need 30 squares effectively from this one block, so I'm going to cut them as thin as I can, but cut them in such a way that although they're thin, they're also consistent. So consistency, as always when you're cutting slices for a kaleidoscope, is more important than the thinness. I usually stand over the top when I'm doing this and just cut down through. I'll normally cut about 6 slices at a time, and because when you cut through it does pull them down slightly, so these will be more rectangular than square, I'll only do about 6 because that gives me a chance then to go back and readjust this cane if I need to and make sure it actually goes back more into a square. So having got our 6, we can start putting them on our sheet. And if you open them out and put them in a certain way and open 2 out together, you should automatically get 2 that mirror each other and they can sit on there. Then it's a case of working out which way that one fits in and just flopping him over. Now we can see actually it's a pretty good match, so my cane size was actually pretty good, so hopefully it'll be the same going down. So the next level, I'm going to open it out as we were, but this time it's going to flip upside down so that it matches. Take your time, make sure you're matching up both top and bottom, and if like this you've got big gaps where it's slightly bowed, you can always take the blunt side of your blade, being very careful to keep your fingers well away from the sharp side, and just very gently push those bits slightly straighter. And then you can do the same but in reverse for these bits going on. Do the same. Just push them slightly so they're straighter. Makes it easier to match your pieces together. Just going to adjust it so it's going straight down there. When you get to fitting in the extra pieces, you might need to start looking for the tell, and the tell inner piece is where it differs slightly, so it's easy to tell which way up it's going to be. Now for me, my tell will be this bit. As you can see here, it hasn't quite gone together as a nice neat join, and that bit's much more exaggerated than that side. So if I look here and put this piece round the right way so it's exactly matching that piece, then I know that if I turn that piece over that way, it's then going to match on here as well. Before, we'll take the back end of our blade and just neaten up, and then it's just a question of getting another 6 pieces and then another 3, and we'll carry on matching them all up until we get our nice pattern all the way across. Now, as you will have noticed, I was a bit short on the bottom here, so what I'm going to do, I'm simply going to add myself an extra sheet of black, push those back down, and then we can chop it off and neaten it off. It was quite a short bit, so it probably wouldn't have made that much difference, but just to show you what you can do if it's not exactly perfect. And then you can see it goes all the way down now to the back. So what we need to do now is we need to make sure that any gaps we've got in here are smoothed over to create a lovely, nice, neat veneer. And my starting point is going to be just with this blunt bit here of the cable needle, so not the point, just with the rolling. I'm just going to very gently roll backwards and forwards and persuade any of the gaps to close up. You can see here there's quite a biggish gap here where I pressed into the sides of the cane. If it makes it easier, you can always pick it up in your hand and get more of a roll going. And that's another reason for doing it on these sheets. It's much easier to manipulate the clay. So just go like that over the whole thing to make sure all the seams are nicely joined. Once you've gone over all the seams, take your second piece of paper. This is why I quite like the wax paper, because you can see through it really easily. And then either with the stainless steel soap as a nice smoothing tool, or with the side of your rolling pin, just go over in small circular motions just to make sure there's no divots or grooves and that you end up with a nice single flat sheet. Once you've done that, either with your roller or with a brayer roller, just go over the whole thing. You can then take off the paper, have a good look to make sure you've got all the pieces matched in together and all the seams are nicely joined in. When you're happy, you can take off any of the black underneath that's showing through, because we only want the pattern, top pattern, to show. And then you should be able to peel the paper backwards and release the whole sheet from it. So now's the time to actually, if you're covering something, put it up to what it is you're covering and check size-wise. That's pretty good fit down the side. A little bit longer, that's not surprising because remember we had to add the extra bit on, but that's fine. So choose your neatest end, and I think I'll use this one to start on the side you want to do. The other thing you can do, if yours is a bit short, is don't forget you can just very gently pull this whole sheet wider. Because what we want it to do, we actually want it to go just fractionally over the edge, so we can pull it over and neaten it off. When you're happy with the size you've got, go back, get some liquid clay or some of the PVA glue and just smear just a small amount of the surface you're planning to cover. This gives us just slightly more manoeuvrability, so that means we can push the clay around more easily than if we didn't have this, and it also means it'll adhere better. You could just put the clay on the wood, but it's more likely to crack or pull off afterwards. But with a little bit of the liquid clay, or the PVA glue, you should get a nice good connection with the clay. So I'm going to put it down just slightly proud, slightly further over than I want it at this side, and then just very gently, making sure I've got no trapped air, pull it over and around. I'm not worried about the overlap at the moment, I'll just pull that slightly down. And again with the brayer roller, I'm just going to go over it, make sure there's no trapped air. And also have a good look at the seams. So particularly as you go over the corners, you might find that some of the seams have opened up. So just with the edge of your needle, just go back and close them up. That's simply because of the force of pulling it round that rolled edge. So go back and give it a roll to neaten it off. And then you should be able to just very gently pull over the edges. You should have just enough of an overlap, and that's what we're looking for, because if we pull it over, we can then go back in a minute and just slice it off neatly. It won't make any difference the amount of pattern you're losing just to pull it over the edge, but it does give it a nice neat finish. Any bit that looks like it might crack, just go back in, give it another roll, and when you're happy, and it's the same at the front edge, then you can simply, with your blade, go along and cut off the excess to give yourself a nice smooth finish. Don't worry about the overhang at the moment, we'll deal with that in a second. And because we've already got that clay on the edges, we can do that really easily, and then just as we did on the edges, you're going to go in above the felt and cut down against the wood, so that when your phone or tablet rests against it, it's going to be resting against the felt and not against the clay. And obviously on this side we've got quite a bit more, so you can always do this in 2 lots. Take off most of the excess to start, and then go closer in. On this one the angle is going to be this way, so again let the edge of the blade do the work for you. First next to the felt, and then just above the felt. Neaten off any edges which may have got pulled out. And then last but not least, with a nice clean wet wipe or wet tissue, getting a nice flat bit against my finger, I'm just going to very gently smooth off the edges, or to create a slight curve. And then, as I mentioned, we shouldn't need to sand at all. If you've got any finger marks or extra bits gone on the top, you can very gently just smooth it over. And then with the piece of card we mentioned right at the start, I'm going to put it on the tile with the piece at the bottom resting on the card so that it doesn't go shiny, so it stays the same as all the rest. And then as before, set it on a tile, tench the whole piece in foil, and bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. And I'll do one side at a time, and then I'll come back and do the other side. With this piece finished and out of the oven, I've started the second piece that's going to go round, and what I did was I started it, same thing, piece of black background, but when I started the pattern I made sure that I was going to put it down in such a way that it was going to marry up, so it would look as though it was continued even though there's a break for where the phone would stand. The other thing I've done is it's quite nice as well to change the pattern slightly from one side to the other. The holes in this particular one is thin on one side and thicker on the other. Put it there so you can see both of them, presumably for different size tablets or different size phones. So it's quite nice to have some form of demarcation so the person who uses it knows which way is up for either the thick slot or the thinner slot. So what I've done is I've put 9 of my squares together as we've done before. Same thing on a sheet of paper on the thin setting number 8 of the black background. And then I've got myself a piece of clay that I've actually done on setting number 3, which is roughly the same thickness as the slices that I've used. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it down, and using a ruler I'm just going to cut myself a slice, which will then sit next to this bit. So put it down and just using the corner of the blade I can then take the slice and just slot it into place. And I made sure with the blunt end of my blade, as we'd done before, that it was nice and flat. And what I'm going to do, I'm now going to change the size of this and make it smaller. So whereas this was just over an inch in width, I'm going to do this half. So I'm going to go just over half an inch, and then I'm going to put smaller squares. So instead of having 3 on each line, I'll have 6, and instead of having 2 lines, I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm actually going to need to cut 24 slices in order to fit them in to here. So I will reduce this down, and then I'll lay all the bits on and bring you back when I've got it done so you can see how that looks. So once your piece is done, as before, just put it on the piece of cardboard so that that piece underneath is shiny. Tent the whole thing in foil on top of your tile and bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. And I'll bring you back when it's finished baking. So there we go, that's it all finished, fully baked, and it's nice and smooth, so I don't need to do any sanding or polishing. I'm happy to leave it exactly as it is. And on the other side there's the smaller pattern, so you can easily see which side is which when you're using it. As always, I'll show you another couple of colour options. So this obviously was the greens we did. This is one in sort of purple colours. So for this one I've used the light pink or the rose, the lilac and the royal violet. And then I've done same on this one, so a small pattern on the back. And for this one I've actually done 2 different colours, so a different colour for each side. So for the blues I've gone for mint, Pacific blue and Calypso blue. And then for the reds I've gone for flamingo, raspberry and Indian red. And again I think it looks quite nice with the 2 different colours on for that one as well. So there we go, the triple blend cane, and just done as a veneer, and obviously you can use it for lots of other things instead. I hope you enjoyed that one. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I really appreciate it for those of you who subscribe, so a special thank you to all of you. I think that's it for now. Hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye.